So I guess thinking about the scope of mental health issues in higher education, what do you think from your mind is kind of some of the causes? What are the key causes at maybe at different career stages?
Yeah, sure. I think where I'd like to start on this is maybe talking about from the perspective of a PhD student. Now, I know we're kind of marketing this podcast series and the company as a whole at, a whole range of individuals in academia, including undergraduate students. But I think that perhaps the experience of undergraduate students might be qualitatively different, and I think it might deserve a podcast of its own, in kind of upcoming weeks. So if I can just take kind of hold from maybe postgraduate students, so master's students who are walking into the PhD, the first word that comes to mind for me is a lack of preparation. Okay, so I remember that when I was an undergraduate student and I was going into my master's program, I wasn't prepared for the step up. Okay, I knew it was going to be harder. I knew there's going to be a lot more work involved, but I wasn't prepared for exactly how much work. I wasn't prepared for the fact that perhaps all of these writing techniques that I've been taught for the last 2 or 3 years might need to change. I might need to adapt them. And the reason I say that is because actually, when I then left from my master's to start my PhD, it was at the same institution. I felt that a lot more was expected of me. I felt that perhaps, yes, there was kind of workshops and, talks that was held every week or two. But I feel that the amount of feedback that I'd got back from my first 4 years of academia didn't in any way hardly map onto what I was expected to do in the PhD. Okay, so I felt underprepared. Is that something that kind of resonates with you, or was that just my experience?
Oh, 100%, yeah. Not even necessarily just about the academic side of the job, but also thinking through the whole mindset of being a PhD candidate, the way that you have to organize your own time, the way that you are completely kind of self-driven, I guess, thinking about, you get done what you're willing to do on any particular day. There's no timetable that you need to stick to. There's no timetable for you to follow. Going back to the writing, though, I think there's a tendency for undergraduate students, for master's students, to write to assessment briefs. So you have these kind of marking criteria that you are kind of beholden to, and if the extent to which you stick to that or not will determine what grade you get. And at the end of the day, a PhD is totally different to that. It's a different way of thinking, a different way of writing. So yeah, completely agree. It's not something that you are prepared for, I don't think, at the beginning, unless you've done stuff on the side in terms of research assistant work or kind of trying to get involved in research in other ways. You don't. I personally didn't feel prepared for that step up at all.
And I kind of guess, just building on that answer, that you go into the role, it's very much self-guided. You might have a lot of kind of pushback from various individuals in your life, so for example your supervisors and whatnot, who are trying to direct you, but that might come at perhaps dissonance with your ideas and your goals. And it's ultimately like you have 101 tasks in your notebook, your to-do list, and you don't know where to start. You don't know how to manage those tasks effectively. And perhaps we're seeing these large numbers of detrimented mental health in PhD students because there's very little guidance there. If you don't have any guidance in terms of what should take priority, what needs to be done by when, if you go from that mindset of these assessment briefs almost guiding you, hand holding you, I guess, through your degree, or especially kind of showing you exactly what's necessary to achieve well in that degree, and suddenly you're left to figure out how to succeed on your own, just going cold turkey, that can put you in a position where perhaps you're trying to do all of these various things at once, because you don't know what you need to prioritize or what should pay off.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the value, hopefully, of podcasts like these, where we can share our own experiences and think about how we've maybe navigated some of those. I think we can still probably call ourselves younger researchers. We're not that far out of that that process. I know we're kind of becoming established researchers, but it's not that long ago that we were kind of navigating this kind of early parts of the PhD. So I think we can pass on a lot of experience from that process. And what I don't want this to do actually is to turn into a way of basically us criticizing more established PhD supervisors, because I think supervisors do a really good job. They do the best that they can. But ultimately, we're, as supervisors as well, we're supervising PhD students now. We're not trained to be career coaches, if that makes sense, in terms of that PhD context. We're trained to help people to do good research. And I think there's maybe a little bit of a, not necessarily a competition, or a conflict, but there is a difficulty in terms of how do you marry up that role? How do you make it so that you are not just there for academic progression, but also personal and career progression? And I know it's something that we're quite kind of keen on looking at and trying to develop in our work, but also kind of trying to diffuse that or kind of take that into a broader academic context.
Yeah, no, I completely agree and resonate with that. So as you know, and I don't know if any of our kind of listeners will know, but alongside kind of the academic world, I've also been involved in coaching for quite a while. And so because of that, I feel that I can offer a slightly different service to perhaps other PhD supervisors. I know how to coach and mentor people through various elements, be that academic or just more broader kind of life coaching. But to marry that with what you've just said, no, PhD supervisors rather, they aren't taught all of these techniques. Now, obviously, there's kind of workshops and seminars to develop those skills, but each supervisor will be coming into that role with different toolkits, and I think that's important to remember, and definitely each to their own in that, and we shouldn't be kind of putting any kind of blame on the supervisors. So what's your opinion of the kind of potential causes for poor mental health as we move towards early career academics after they've completed their PhDs?
I mean, I don't think they're that different, to be honest. I think the lack of preparation for what it actually looks like, what your workload looks like, is lacking. There's definitely a lack of preparation there. So thinking through, obviously, as part of your PhD, what good research should look like. You've hopefully published a couple of papers. You've hopefully done a little bit of teaching maybe as well. But the sheer increase in the workload, I don't think is something that you're really prepared for. So kind of trying to juggle different roles. It might be that some people have got their first academic role before they finish their PhD. So they're trying to maybe finish that thesis, trying to get through that Viva examination, while also trying to develop that new PhD or that new research stream, whilst also managing new academic roles, new administration roles, figuring out how to use different learning management systems, figuring out how do you be a personal tutor to 10 or 15 different students, all of which have slightly different needs. How do you...
The list goes on.
Materials? There's just so much to do. And I think there's a tendency, particularly in the early years of being an academic, that you try and take on all of these different roles because you're just eager to please.
Sure.
There's lots of emphasis, I suppose, on trying to develop different areas of competency, because I think in the back of your mind, you're maybe thinking about maybe in, 5-6 years time, you might want to go for a promotion, or if you're in the States, you might have a tenure clock that you're working to.
Mm-hmm.
So the more service you can do, the more teaching you can do, the more research you can get out, the better for your future career. Or so that's what the kind of mindset is. And I know that you've thought about the value of saying no to things as well. I don't know if you want to give us an overview of what your thoughts are on that.
So I published an article in the Times Higher Education, which I'll link in the crib sheet. I think it was around about this time last year. And essentially what that article was titled was How to Successfully Say No. And it did get a lot of heat in terms of when it got kind of released on social media, because I think the core aim that I was trying to get across in this article was that, as you've just very eloquently described, early career academics have lots of very much competing job roles, I think importantly in the first year they might even be completing their PhD as well, and so actually that has lots of importance. And so how does that marry with the rest of the kind of academic duties? And I think that when we are trying to impress, when we are looking ahead to try and get these promotions, we tend just to say yes to everything. We say yes to sitting on the committee. We say yes to reviewing papers. We say yes to taking part in research which isn't really in our field, but we might be able to make a new network or a new collaborator. We might be invited onto a paper because we have specific expertise in a particular analysis, and we might be asked to mentor PhD students or postgraduate researchers as well. And so because of all of these factors, yes, we don't know what is a priority. And the key question that I asked several institutions when I was doing a little bit of recce work for this was, if you want to get promoted, what do you put highly on your kind of CV? What is the key thing that you need to hit? What are these metrics? How do you measure success in your field? And very few academics or institutions could actually say to me, well, to get promoted here you need 5 papers in this particular area, you need to have supervised X amount of PhD students yourself, you need to sit on 2 committees, each of which for 6 months. These metrics just aren't clearly defined. And so it puts the emphasis back on the early career academic to just say yes to everything, because they hope to catch a break. You need a lot of luck in academia as well, because these boundaries aren't very clearly defined. And I think one of the key things that I learned when I was writing this article, as brief article as it was that when individuals were saying yes to things, oftentimes they were doing so without their line manager's knowledge or understanding. And so the impact that this has is, if you continuously say yes to things, you're not informing your line manager, and as such it's not going on your workload plan. And suddenly your line manager is looking outwards saying, well, actually I think this academic is doing okay, because their workload plan says they've got 100% of their hours complete with various duties that should be putting them on the right track to promotion. Whereas actually when you're looking at that from your perspective, you're saying, well, no, because I'm sitting on these 2 extra committees, I've offered to supervise a student in a different department because they're interested in my research. And there's lots of various things that's going on. In addition to that, you're maybe reviewing 2 to 4 papers a month for a journal, which may or may not be being counted into your workload. And so in this paper, I gave some hints and tips of how to have these difficult conversations with your line manager, how to have these difficult conversations with people who are above you and perhaps might present barriers for your ultimate career progression. But yeah, I'd be very interested in some feedback about that article.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I read the article, to be honest with you. But I remember when I was reading it, thinking through that I wish that people had told me 4 or 5 years ago that I didn't have to do everything that I was invited to do or asked to do to be able to show that I was doing things in higher education. Yeah, I think the idea that you don't automatically have to have this intuitive, yes, I'll do that response to everything is really useful. And I think when we think about the core kind of cause of a lot of mental health issues in academia, burnout is the thing that seems to come up time and time again. Thinking about the sheer volume of work and the time packet of the time envelope that you have to complete that work. I read something recently, actually, I can't remember who the author was, but I was thinking about what burnout actually is. It's not about just the volume of work. It's about the interaction between the volume of work that you have to do and the expectation that other people have of you.
Of course, yeah.
And it's about, and it kind of ties in, I think, to the fact that you were talking about there in terms of your line manager thinking that you are doing a particular amount of work, but you're actually doing other work. Thinking about the amount of hours that you are allocated for particular tasks. So it might be that you have a module that you're leading or you're given X number of hours, but actually you're finding that you're doing double that. And trying to manage that. So it's about thinking through then, how do you actually manage your time? How do you make sure that you have the most effective use of the time that you have available? And I think that's where some of the tips that we're trying to come up with is hopefully going to help people with this in terms of thinking through the fact that we're probably not going to be able to change the way that academia is structured. I think that's probably too big a task to do at the minute. But thinking through within the constraints that you do have, what do you need to do? And what can you maybe say no to? And of the things that you do need to do, how can you do that in the most effective way? I think that they're going to be the three things that really, if we're going to be solving this mental health crisis that is currently happening in academia, those three things. What do you have to do? What can you say no to? And of the things that you have to do, how can you do them effectively and efficiently? If we can crack those questions, if we can make sure that people know the answers to those questions, then hopefully what we can do is to reduce this kind of mental health epidemic that is happening in academia.